folks, welcome back to Threes In. Bobo's here. I can't help but smile because I know a couple of the punchlines coming with this story and it cracks me up. At any rate, I was down in the Auger Inn one night, go figure, and happened to run into a fellow named Hal Meisterlin. Now, he could have been a lieutenant colonel at the time, maybe a colonel. I don't think he was a colonel, lieutenant colonel. At any rate, Hal was a fighter pilot. He was a F-100 pilot, may have flown F-4 too. I'm not quite sure. Good-looking guy, wore a crew cut, and just the epitome of the old school instructors we used to have when I went through in 1970. Just salt of the earth, solid guy. Anyway, we were down there having a couple pops, and he got to telling stories. He had been flying the 38 for years upon years. He started, I think, I don't know if he was initial cadre or not. He started early on in the early 60s. And then he went to Vietnam. So he said he came back from Vietnam, and he said for his requalification check in the 38, coming up initial, he says he pitches out, comes around, gear flaps, starts the final turn. He goes, "Holy crap, what are those?" And the IP says, "What are what, sir?" He says, "Those lights that are flashing all over the place. What the hell are those?" And he says, "Oh, those are VASIs." He says, "VASIs? What are VASIs?" "Well, sir, they're put there to help you land." "Oh, never knew that." So he came in, did touch and go and so forth. And he says the second pattern, he became so mesmerized playing around with the VASIs, red over white, red over red, white over white, and so forth. He said he damn near splattered on the runway, getting distracted by the VASIs. So he says he goes back to a second tour in Vietnam, I think maybe in the F-4, I don't know. And then he comes back to the command, to Air Training Command. And he says he's coming up initially, he pitches out and comes around the final turn, or gear flaps and starts the final turn. He goes, "Holy crap, what's that?" And the kid says, "What's what?" He says, "That green and red and yellow flashing thing on my dashboard." He says, "Well, sir," he says, "that's the AOA indicator." He says, "What's that for?" He said, "Well, that's to help you land." He says, "Oh, really?" He says, "Now he's got lights on the outside, lights on the inside, flashing and blinking at him." And he says, "Jesus Christ." He says, "What are we doing to ourselves?" He says, "Let me show you something." So he asked Mr. Moss for a spare piece of paper. Mr. Moss was our bartender at that time. He was the bartender when I showed up at Randolph in 1970, and he was the bartender when I retired in 1970 or 1988. At any rate, Hal says, "It's not that hard. It's not rocket science." He said, "Take a piece of paper and like this," and he said, "You show it to a kid," and he says, "Now, all you got to do is tip it." He says, "Right there, looks about a normal runway." He says, "That's probably a little bit too flat." And he says, "That's way too steep." He says, "That's all you need. Just a simple piece of paper." He says, "I can teach any kid how to land." At any rate, we flew a non-standard VASI. Now, a standard VASI will take you from 2.5 to 3 degrees and put you about 750 feet down the runway when you touch down. A non-standard VASI will put you about 450 feet short of the runway if you follow it all the way down to impact. But typically about 1,000 feet out, you start to transition to the runway for your primary source of reference and drop the VASIs out of the cross-check. I have told several stories here where I make reference to red over wheat. Ideally, in an approach, we would fly a red over white. You've got two sets of lights there. The furthest one you want to be red, which is telling you you're below the glide slope, and the nearest set of lights you want white, telling you you're above. So that puts you right in the glide path coming down. Well, it was not uncommon for us to fudge and fly red over pink, if you will, to get down a little lower. And a lot of us at Vance called that red over wheat because Enid, Oklahoma, where Vance was the wheat capital of the world at one time. So that's where that expression came from, flying a red over wheat approach. And I was very comfortable with that because you just get settled on that glide path. You get down, come through the overrun, and then pull the power to idle, and you're going to touch down within 500 feet of the runway threshold. To tie this discussion up, let's go back to Hal Meisterling again. In 1979, Jerry Hodson and I were in Air Training Command Safety, and we were flying up to Vance on, just go up on a staff assistance visit, go up to have lunch, okay? Staff assistance visit, talk to the safety shop and so forth. So anyway, we're up around Dallas, and we get a call from air traffic control telling us that command had gotten hold of us and wanted us to divert into Shepherd, that there had been an aircraft incident. Well, okay then. Shepherd's just right out our left window. Idle, board, speed brakes, and so we just G it up and sink down and check in with Shepherd and land. They take us over to the safety shop, and Hal Meisterling had been on a low-level two-ship with some Germans, and he got hit with one of them. I think maybe the guy that hit him was solo. But be that as it may, we got in the safety shop, and they didn't hit hard. They just brush up against each other. So we walk in the safety shop, and there is Hal sitting there in his crew cut, and just a great guy. We walk in there, he looks at us from ATC Safety. He says, Jesus Christ, he says, you guys have an airborne alert system where you just up there on orbit waiting for guys to prang or what? And we got a big kick out of that, something that stuck with me all these years. But Hal was a great guy, and I just really am glad I found an applicable place to fit him into one of my stories here. So what are those lights for? Well, they are to help you land. Really? Well, good on you. At any rate, this is Bobo. Base gear. Stop.